Closing of lanes from New Jersey into New York City on the George Washington Bridge, announcing that 2 of his aides lose their jobs. We're leaving here on C-SPAN. A reminder, you can continue to follow it online at cspan.org. We'll have it also for you later in our program schedule on the C-SPAN networks. But the U.S. House is gaveling in. We take you there live.
People's House. May they anticipate the opportunities and difficulties that are before them and before so many Americans, with steadfast determination to work together towards solutions that will benefit their countrymen. Grant that they be worthy of the responsibilities they have been given by their constituents and truly be the people you have called them to be. May the walls of disagreement that have divided this assembly be put aside and replaced with a spirit of respect and dignity. And may your Spirit, O God, be in all our hearts and minds, and encourage us to do the works of peace and justice now and always. May all that we do be done for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Forbes.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise in opposition to media reports that have suggested the closure of military commissaries in the United States and that may be under consideration by the Department of Defense. Our national defense and the men and women who volunteer to serve are not the cause of our current financial fiscal crisis. Proposals that ask them to carry the weight of solving it are unacceptable. Commissaries are a vital recruitment and retention tool essential to maintaining the all-volunteer force. President Obama recognized this fact earlier this year when he visited Camp Pendleton during a furlough day and said commissary closures are not how a great nation should be treating its military and military families. Each year, commissaries provide an average 31% savings for our military families. Additionally, by allowing the Defense Commissary Agency based out of Fort Lee, Virginia, to purchase products at higher volumes, the 178 commissaries in the United States bring down costs all across our commissaries. I urge my colleagues to oppose any effort to close our commissaries, a system that's highly valued by our service members and part of the commitment we make to take care of them during and after their time volunteering in service to our nation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman's time expired. For what purposes does the gentleman from California rise?
Asking consent to address House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as a representative of the San Joaquin Valley of California, I know that our economic recovery has been even at best, and unemployment remains unacceptably high in areas like my district. Those on unemployment are not socking taxpayer dollars away for a rainy day. Today already is their rainy day. Their benefits go back into our economy immediately for basic needs like food and rent while they look for work. After 27 years at an insurance company, Jacqueline of Antwater, California, was let go last May. Since then, the 53-year-old has struggled to find work. Another constituent of mine, Lewis in Fresno, lost his unemployment insurance at the end of December. This father wrote, "If I don't find a job in the next couple of weeks, then I will not be able to pay my rent or pay for food for my family." With all the talk about restoring certainty to our economy, we cannot forget that American families drive this economy. Now is not the time to take money out of their pockets if they are also struggling to recover. Let's restore unemployment with a bipartisan effort. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purposes does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, while home for Christmas, I reflected on the economic challenges America faces and the parallels today's economy has with the one Ronald Reagan inherited from Jimmy Carter in 1981. Both were characterized by high unemployment and low labor force participation. I'll paraphrase some of what President Reagan said in his first inaugural address. Idle industries have cast workers into unemployment, causing human misery and personal indignity. Those who do work are denied a fair return for their labor by a tax system which penalizes successful achievement and keeps us from maintaining full productivity. For decades, we have piled deficit upon deficit, mortgaging our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present. By the end of Ronald Reagan's presidency, Americans' unemployment rate was 5.4%, and our economy was the envy of the world. It's time we learn from history. As President Reagan said, government is the problem. Individuals free from the heavy hand of big government to pursue their dreams, they create prosperity. It's time we revisit this simple, sacred truth. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
This past Monday was the first time in months that 1.3 million out-of-work Americans went to their mailbox and did not find an unemployment check. People like Caitlin Smith from my state of California, a Marine Corps vet and the mother of 2 young children, she said that she'd been searching for work for months but has not had success. California is starting to recover, but it still has 400,000 fewer jobs than it did before the downturn. It's especially hard to find jobs in the high desert where she lives, but the family can't move because her husband, a veteran of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, must remain near the combat center until he's discharged from the Marines until July. The loss of her benefits will cut even more deeply into the couple's income. Caitlin says the family's already skimping on basics, including heat. She says, I have to keep the house at 55 degrees even though I have 2 little girls, age 2.5 and 1.5. For Caitlin and others like her, we must extend unemployment benefits, and we must extend them now.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker. This week I went to Augusta, Georgia, to participate in an oversight hearing with Chairman Jeff Miller of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. This visit was the result of multiple deaths and delays in care reported in the Augusta Veterans Hospital. We must find out what exactly went wrong. As both a U.S. Marine and a current medical doctor in the Navy Reserves, I take reports of poor care for our veterans very seriously. I questioned hospital staff on how, when, and why these lapses in care occurred, and who is ultimately responsible. While it appears that under new leadership the hospital is heading in a positive direction, this is just the beginning of a full investigation. We have made promises to our veterans. It is vital that we fulfill these promises. I've pledged to work to hold those responsible and the VA accountable. And I'm fully committed to making sure that our veterans receive world-class health care in Augusta as well as in VA hospitals all across the country. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Peace Bridge located along the northern border of my Western New York district facilitates the transport of over $30 billion in commerce annually. However, increasing wait times and delays pose a significant threat to our nation's economy. While I am encouraged by the start of the pre-inspection pilot at the Peace Bridge for commercial vehicles, which would allow trucks entering the United States to be pre-screened on the Canadian side of the border, I am concerned about staffing levels with custom agents at the border. I have called on Customs and Border Protection to increase staffing levels at the bridge to facilitate easier accessibility at the northern border crossing, and also encouraging FY 2014 Homeland Security Appropriations budget to include full funding for Customs and Border Protection officers' staffing requests. The streamlined flow of people and goods across the border is critical to the Western New York economy and to the nation's economy. I am committed to fighting to preserve and improve our relationship with Canada and our economic relationship. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
National Senator to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate enough that Obamacare has increased the cost of health care for families across the country. On top of the skyrocketing premiums, limited choices for doctors and coverage, and regulatory burdens on small business, it's worrisome that people's personal information is now being subjected to potential fraud in the Obamacare exchanges. The security problems with healthcare.gov go far beyond error messages and connection issues. In many cases, the people in charge of collecting and processing our most sensitive information haven't been fully trained or vetted, and although the administration knew the website hadn't been properly tested, they launched it anyways, leaving American people vulnerable. That's why I introduced H.R. 3652, the No Identity Theft in Healthcare Act, which would increase penalties for those who abuse their access to personal information that Americans are forced to submit when signing up for Obamacare to commit identity theft. I also look forward to supporting the Healthcare Exchange Security and Transparency Act later this week. Mr. Speaker, it's unacceptable that people's personal information is at risk, and the administration needs to address this. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On December 23rd, I introduced H.R. 3804, legislation to repeal an ill-conceived provision of the budget bill that reduced the cost of living adjustment for military retirees. As a member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I believe our service members, veterans, and their families must receive the benefits they have so honorably earned and deserve. These benefits are owed to them without equivocation. We should not balance the budget on the backs of military retirees who served our country so bravely for decades. They should not be punished because of Congress's failure to get our fiscal house in order. That is why I urge Speaker Boehner to allow a vote today on my bill, H.R. 3804, and repeal this egregious provision. Clearly, there is substantial bipartisan support to correct this. Let's vote on H.R. 3804 for our military retirees today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, last October, a constituent living in Columbia received a frightening phone call from a gentleman in North Carolina. It appeared the constituent's security information was obtained by a stranger while enrolling for health insurance on the government health care website. The American people should not have to worry about personal information being compromised due to the government's inability to keep a website secure. Had the gentleman from North Carolina not contacted this South Carolinian, he may have never realized his information was being breached. Obamacare is flawed and must be repealed. Because the President and Senate refused to join us in these efforts, the House continues to act. Tomorrow the House will vote on a bill that requires Health and Human Services to notify individuals when their personal information is stolen or unlawfully accessed. We must continue to work to repeal Obamacare by replacing it with a plan to preserve the doctor-patient relationship as long proposed by Congressman Tom Price. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th in the global war on terrorism.
Its time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
For 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge my Republican colleagues to recognize the devastating consequences of air pollution, which is causing, or at least contributing to greatly, the drastic changes in the Earth's climate. Last year, we experienced severe record-setting weather across the country, yet Republicans and climate deniers argue that no single weather event can be proven to have been caused by climate change. Paradoxically, climate deniers are now using the extreme cold snap as evidence to support their cause, which is to do away with all laws and regulations that protect our precious air quality. The maddening denial of the link between air quality and climate change is reckless, and it's a denial of scientific fact. Our posterity deserve more. We know, and 95% of scientists agree, that climate change leads to more severe weather overall, and the evidence is overwhelming. Now's the time for a real debate on climate change before another devastating year of extreme weather that takes lives, destroys communities, and wreaks havoc on our community, on our society, and our economy. Thank you. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma rise?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in recognition of January 2014 being National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. Human trafficking victims suffer repeatedly with no apparent way out. An estimated between 100,000 and 300,000 children each year become victims of America of this abhorrent practice. Many runaway children become victims of human trafficking within 48 hours of leaving home, and it is crucial that we as Americans are aware of our surroundings and immediately contact authorities when we see anything suspicious around children. Traffickers can be found at airports, parking lots, schools, malls, and other places where they search for young victims. 2 years ago, I authored a bill which this House passed, the Senate passed, and the President signed at the end of 2012, eliminating trafficking on our military bases around the world and our State Department facilities around the world. We as Americans believe every person has value. Every person has rights that are given to them by their Creator. Mr. Speaker, I would encourage every American, if they come into contact with someone that they suspect is a victim of human trafficking, to contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 888-373-7888. Let's help our fellow Americans.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague previously mentioned, most Americans this week felt as though they were living on the North Pole. There was a condition called the polar vortex that became part of our common vernacular. Normal routines were disrupted, schools closed, water mains ruptured, car batteries failed, and tragically, weather-related deaths went up. So it didn't take long for conservative commentators to offer this cold weather phenomenon as proof that the planet isn't warming, that this is all a hoax or some left-wing liberal ideology. But the fact is that scientists have told us that the real and measurable decline of Arctic sea ice, that is the direct result of warmer weather and climate change, is creating this polar vortex that allows weather conditions that normally remain fixed over the Arctic to spin out of control. They slip south and they subject us to Arctic-like weather conditions. Now, this is a fact that we need to recognize and do something about, or weather conditions are going to become far more common and far more severe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past week, the college football season culminated in one of the best BCS championship games ever played when the Auburn Tigers took on the FSU Seminoles. Even though I am a resident of Florida, I'm a graduate of Auburn and was, of course, rooting for my Tigers. I want to commend Auburn's coach, Gus Malzahn, for taking Auburn from worst to first in the SEC and leading his team to play for the national championship game. His efforts were nothing short of incredible. He made believers not only of his players, but also believers out of all of us. He showed us that persistence, discipline, self-confidence, and faith in God will lead to success both individually and as a team. I also want to congratulate my friend, Coach Jimbo Fisher of Florida State. Coach Fisher is not only a great coach, but he obviously married well because his wife, Candy, is also an Auburn alumni. While my heart is always in Auburn, my hat goes off to the Florida State Seminoles for a well-earned victory. Congratulations, War Eagle, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois rise? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to commemorate a milestone in our nation's history, 50 years ago, President Lyndon B. Johnson stood before Congress and declared an unconditional war on poverty. As we reflect on this war, I'm inspired by the progress we've made in 50 years. We've expanded economic opportunity, and we've made the American dream a reality for millions. But this is not enough. Recent events, like allowing unemployment insurance to expire, remind us that the war is not over. Even though our economy is recovering from the recession, 10.9 million Americans are still struggling to find work. Meanwhile, 16 million children live in poverty, and now the 1.3 million Americans who lost unemployment insurance have no means to provide for their family while they look for work. This cannot continue. No child should go to bed hungry, and no family should struggle to keep a roof over their heads. 50 years ago, we started a war, and yes, we've won many battles, but it's time to win the war. And we must start by making sure that Americans can continue to meet basic needs as they pursue their dreams. So I urge my colleagues to stand with me and extend unemployment insurance.
Gentlewoman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
I seek request to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to highlight yet another of the unintended consequences of the Democratic health care law. Because of the employer mandate in Obamacare, our volunteer fire departments and emergency response organizations are at risk of having their volunteers be considered employees and are therefore being forced to choose between retaining those volunteers and using their precious resources to comply with this mandate, or cut those volunteers and the vital services they provide to our communities. As I have heard from people in my district, Cattaraugus County Office of Emergency Services, the impact would be absolutely detrimental to critical services in rural areas like Cattaraugus County. I ask Congress to fix this unfair burden on our emergency volunteers and support H.R. 3685, the Protecting Volunteer Firefighters and Emergency Responders Act, introduced by my good friend, Representative Lou Barletta. With that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut rise?
For 1 minute to revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise to call attention to the 90th anniversary of the Sikorsky Aircraft Company, one of the linchpins of our state's advanced industrial base, a pillar of our national defense, and the world's premier helicopter manufacturer. 90 years ago, Russian-born inventor Igor Sikorsky opened the Sikorsky Aero Engineering Corporation for business on Long Island. Since then, the history of this pioneering company has been a string of firsts. Sikorsky built the first practical helicopter, the VS-300, in 1939. 5 years later, a Sikorsky vehicle performed the first helicopter combat rescue in history, saving soldiers in Burma during World War II. In 1945, a Sikorsky helicopter took part in the first ever civilian helicopter rescue, rescuing survivors from a sinking vessel in Long Island Sound. And in 1957, Dwight Eisenhower took the first presidential ride in Sikorsky-made Marine One, long one of the defining symbols of the American executive. Today, in my state of Connecticut, Sikorsky continues to build the best helicopters in the world, including the Black Hawks, so critical to our national security, and to move the technology of rotor-powered aircraft forward. To UTC leadership and the almost 16,000 hardworking men and women of Sikorsky, congratulations on this anniversary, and here's to many more. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Speaker, I ask for this consent to revise and extend my remarks and address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this country has 10.9 million people out of work, many of whom have been out of work for over 6 months. We can't wait any longer. Families want to work. They want a job that will allow them to put food on the table, take family vacations, and save for their children's education. And $300 a week just won't cut it. As we speak, the President has a permit on his desk, one that has been ready to sign for almost his entire tenure in office. The Keystone XL pipeline is a rare project supported by labor, business, and the hardworking taxpayers of this country, and one that has been studied and dissected more than most. This project is ready to go, and with the stroke of a pen, Mr. President, you can create 40,000 good-paying, stable jobs across this country that American families want and deserve. All they need is your signature. Let's finally create the jobs that politicians love to talk about, get families back to work and off unemployment where they want to be. I yield back.
Woman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Nevada rise? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. As of the new year, 1.3 million Americans, including 17,600 Nevadans, are without a critical economic lifeline, the emergency unemployment insurance that has helped men and women stay out of poverty and keep their families afloat as they look for a job. By allowing this program to expire, those already struggling to make ends meet are now facing even greater hardship as they are left to wonder how to put food on the table, keep a roof over their family's head, or put gas in the car. Denying this vital lifeline is not only morally indefensible, it's also economically short-sighted. Unemployment insurance benefits not only help the individual and their families who receive them, but they also boost our economy. Failing to renew this program will weaken economic growth and cost our country 240,000 jobs, including almost 3,000 in Nevada. So for the thousands of Nevadans who lost emergency unemployment insurance at the beginning of the year, and the 842 more who stand to lose their benefits at the end of this week, inaction is unacceptable. I urge Speaker Boehner to bring this to the floor and vote in favor. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise to urge the Republican leaders to allow a vote on extending unemployment insurance benefits to the thousands of workers in my central New York district and the 1.3 million workers across the country who have lost these benefits. Because Congress has failed to act, hundreds of thousands of families are not having a happy new year. This important relief provides a lifeline to people who worked hard, they played by the rules, and they're out of work through no fault of their own. By providing this vital but temporary assistance to unemployed workers, this program ensures workers and their families are able to make ends meet during their job searches. Extending unemployment insurance should not be a partisan issue. In fact, this program was signed into law by President George W. Bush and has been reauthorized several times by members of both political parties during the time of economic recovery. If there are reforms needed to help get people back to work, then let's make those reforms. But don't toss out the whole program. Mr. Speaker, our economy is still recovering, and thousands of hardworking Central New Yorkers are still struggling to find a job. Failure to extend unemployment insurance hurts the economy across Central New York and across this country. The Senate has already taken bipartisan action on extending unemployment insurance. It's time for the House to do the same. Mr. Speaker, I just don't understand why we don't just have a vote. It would help the economy and it would help our families.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many people, a new year marks a time of hope and optimism. But millions of Americans are instead beginning this year with fear and worry. They're wondering how they're going to make ends meet, pay their rent, or put food on the table. That's because they woke up just a few days after Christmas to find that their emergency unemployment assistance had been terminated, cutting them off from a needed lifeline. Now, that's just about the cruelest thing I can think of happening. It's mean, it's unnecessary, it's kicking people down who are already down. It's just plain shameful. It is shameful. And it's not the kind of America I believe in. Shouldn't we be embracing policies like unemployment insurance that keep families afloat? Shouldn't we be looking at our communities, our neighbors, and saying, yes, America will be there for you in your time of need? Yes, we should say that. To every one of my colleagues, I say join us in doing the right thing and restoring these needed benefits today. We need to do the right thing and not the wrong thing. And we need to do that now. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Sir. Pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on January 9, 2014 at 9:42 a.m. That the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 667. That the Senate passed Senate 1171. Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on the Rules, I call up House Resolution 455 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 79, House Resolution 455. Resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 2279 to amend the Solid Waste Disposal Act relating to review of regulations under such act and to amend the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980 relating to financial responsibility for classes of facilities. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce now printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-30. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in Part A of the report of Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the amendment in the nature of a substitute made in order as original text. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 3362 to amend the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act to require transparency in the operation of American health benefit exchanges. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate with 40 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and 2, one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 3. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 3811 to require notification of individuals of breaches of personally identifiable information through exchanges under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against the provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 2, One motion to recommit.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, House Resolution 455 provides for the consideration of 3 important bills which were reported by the Energy and Commerce Committee. H.R. 2279, the Reducing Excessive Deadline Obligations Act of 2013, H.R. 3362, the Exchange Information Disclosure Act, and H.R. 3811, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act of 2014. H.R. 2279 is a bill to address the burdensome and outdated deadlines for certain rulemaking activities conducted by the Environmental Protection Agency under the Solid Waste Disposal Act and the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and this provides flexibility for the Environmental Protection Agency in order to streamline a process critical to cleaning up sites contaminated with certain toxic or hazardous chemicals. It further requires the Environmental Protection Agency to evaluate existing state or other federal financial assurance requirements to determine whether additional requirements are in fact necessary. Finally, it requires the owner or operator of a chemical storage site to report the presence of such chemicals to the state emergency response commissions. It is a common sense piece of legislation to help clean up areas that have been polluted and allow for their reclamation or development, and this could bring jobs and economic benefits to neighborhoods which have been so affected. As to the 2 healthcare-related pieces of legislation, these are targeted bills to address just a few of the massive problems the American public has witnessed over the last few months pertaining to the calamitous rollout of the federal healthcare.gov website. The data obtained by healthcare.gov is one of the largest collections of personal information ever assembled. It links information between 7 different federal agencies, state agencies, and government contractors. In promising lower costs and widespread health coverage for Americans, President Obama failed to mention that the Affordable Care Act's mandates and requirements will create a large-scale disruption of the entire health insurance market. The resulting cancellation of insurance plans and high costs for employers to continue providing insurance for their workers has left millions of Americans with no choice other than to purchase health insurance through the Affordable Care Act's exchanges, subjecting their personal information to the vulnerable security infrastructure. The initial launch of healthcare.gov on October 1, 2013 was plagued with glitches and errors. Not only did the administration fail to establish basic functionality of the website, but the initial problems really only break the surface of the deeper security threats in the underlying law. A multitude of gaps remain in the website's security infrastructure, making the website a wide-open target for hackers and identity thieves. These flaws continue to pose a threat to the security of Americans' personal data. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't that the administration was not alerted to these security concerns on the website prior to the launch. MITRE Corporation, a contractor for the Department of Health and Human Services, alerted the agency that 19 unaddressed security vulnerabilities plagued the website prior to its launch on October 1st. Top officials at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, including the Chief Information Security Officer, Teresa Fryer, along with the website's project manager, Tony Trenkle, both refused to sign the authority to operate license that was necessary to actually launch healthcare.gov. Despite these known issues, the director of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Marilyn Tavenner, continued the launch of the website. This is much more than a faulty website. This is about the American people who cannot trust their government to certify that their personal information will be safe on a government-run website. The security threat goes beyond just an individual's primary application. Once an individual's personal information is entered into the system, the exchange has the ability to access information within the Department of Homeland Security, the Internal Revenue Service, Social Security, and the Treasury Department. The administration has opened numerous federal agencies to data breaches and unauthorized access. Just before the holidays, the entire nation saw firsthand what a massive security breach looks like. Over 40 million target customers, their personal data was compromised by computer hackers who pilfered personal financial information and identification. Now, Target has gone out of their way to alert customers of the security breach. But unfortunately, the federal government has no such obligation under the law. And this is a point that I don't think most people are aware of. It's not required, it's not a mandate that you have a Target charge card or that you shop at Target. But it's certainly required and a mandate that you buy your insurance through healthcare.gov. This is a coercive federal policy that now is pulling people into its website and refuses to provide them the very same protection that we demand that the private sector do for a voluntary purchase. Instead of following the same requirements placed on the private sector, the federal government has gone out of their way to avoid imposing this basic due diligence on their own exchanges. Even when a notification requirement was specifically requested during the rulemaking process on the exchanges, the administration just simply refused. In the March 27, 2012 Federal Register, Department of Health and Human Services responded stating, and I quote, "We do not plan to include the specific notification procedures in the final rule." Continuing to quote, "Consistent with this approach, we do not include specific policies for investigation of data breaches in this final rule." Close quote. Furthermore, state laws require that many of the 14 state-run insurance exchanges that they do disclose such information. But no such law exists for the federally run exchange. And Mr. Speaker, I would remind you that 36 states rely upon the federally run exchange. Look, we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars. The American people deserve to know that their personal information is protected and to be notified if that protection lapses. Let's be honest, healthcare.gov is the most talked about website in years. The massive amount of personal information that is collected through healthcare.gov and its ability to access multiple government databases creates the perfect environment for targeting by hackers. Over 16 attempts to hack into the system have already been reported, not to mention the many stories that have been reported in the press on the mishandling and sharing of individuals' data. Identity theft is a threat not only to an individual's credit rating and personal finances, but also to overall United States national security. Most Americans would be shocked to learn that this level of protection is not already in place for an initiative the size of the Affordable Care Act. Well, today, the House is working to correct this injustice, protecting Americans when the administration has refused to do so. The Obama administration has consistently refused to disclose detailed data on how many Americans have actually completed the Obamacare enrollment process. Now it is more than 3 months after the launch of the exchanges, and we just simply do not know how many Americans are enrolled in the exchange plan. It was the administration who initially defined success of the exchange as the number of Americans who actually enroll in the program. The number of enrollments are the only way to evaluate whether the more than $1 trillion that was spent on this thing by the administration is actually working. The President's commitment to an open and transparent government, repeated so many times during the passage of the Affordable Care Act, represents yet one more broken promise in a long string of broken promises. When this administration has failed, and where it has failed, the bill before us will require the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services to provide detailed weekly reports to the American people about the enrollment number on healthcare.gov. The American people deserve to know, what are they getting for their hard-earned tax dollars that they've spent on the demands of this administration? It is the American people who are suffering because of the mismanagement and failures of this administration. Today, we have the opportunity to provide transparency and protect Americans' personal information. The rule before us today provides for 1 hour of debate, equally divided between the majority and the minority, for each of the bills contained in the rule. The minority has further afforded the customary motion to recommit on each piece of legislation. I want to encourage my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying bills, and stand with the millions of Americans who are asking, who are demanding that we protect their privacy. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado rise?
Yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Burgess, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the rule today under which 3 bills are being brought to the floor: H.R. 3811, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act; H.R. 2279, the Reducing Excessive Deadlines Obligations Act; and H.R. 3362, the Exchange Information Disclosure Act. You wouldn't know by their names what these bills actually do. I plan to discuss that, and more importantly, I plan to discuss, Mr. Speaker, what these bills fail to accomplish. These misguided and superfluous bills were brought under a very restrictive process. 2 of them are being brought to the floor under a completely closed rule that blocks all efforts by members to improve the legislation. Democrats yesterday on the Rules Committee proposed an open rule for these bills, allowing members from both sides of the aisle to offer their ideas to make them better, and it was voted down in the Rules Committee in a partisan vote. Instead of moving forward and tackling challenges like extending unemployment, which has been talked about, or passing a jobs bill or an infrastructure bill, or fixing our broken immigration system, or reforming our tax system, again, we're discussing bills relating to the Affordable Care Act that don't seek to improve the Act and make it work better for the American people, but only add more paperwork and bureaucracy and costs to the health care system we already have by putting additional requirements on federal workers and others that are working hard to ensure that Obamacare works for America every day. Of the 112 legislative days we have left this year, we need to ensure that we spend them wisely. And I don't think that these 3 bills are a good way for us to use 2 days of our time. The first bill, H.R. 3362, calls on HHS to publish weekly reports on consumer interactions with healthcare.gov, including the details of all calls received by the call center. Now, much of this information is already available monthly. There are already reliable updates on enrollment numbers and numerous updates on the websites and issues consumers have encountered. Look, it's not the time while you're fixing the website and getting it working, it's not the time to put additional requirements on those that are laboring to ensure that Americans can sign up for affordable health care. Again, it's more information about who's calling and what they're doing, weekly rather than monthly, will provide an additional workload for those who are trying to make sure that the websites are functioning for America. It'll actually make it harder for the websites to function by having to divert some effort, if this were to become law, simply to building reporting requirements that were mandated by Congress. It's almost as if this bill was designed to make the website work worse, Mr. Speaker, by moving developers and others without any additional resources away from making the necessary improvements towards building entirely new reporting systems just so people can have information weekly instead of monthly. I mean, it would be great, first of all, just to have information weekly. I'd love to have information daily. I'd love to have information in real time. I used to run an internet company. That would be wonderful to have that information. You have to weigh the costs and benefits and say, is it worth building into this system real-time reporting? What are we foregoing by doing that? Is it worth it to say we want the information weekly instead of monthly? And again, if you're building it from scratch, and perhaps if the Republicans had offered this as an amendment into the original Affordable Care Act, maybe this could have been incorporated in. 3 years ago, and we could have built a system with either real-time or weekly reporting. But here, where we are today, clearly the top priority needs to be that this website works well for the American people so they can get affordable health care for themselves and their family. That's what the American people want. Now, let's talk about security and safeguards for consumer information. Again, you have the germ of a good idea. There is, of course, when the government has our personal information, we need to make sure that there's adequate safeguards. That goes for the IRS, it goes for military personnel files, it goes for the Affordable Care Act, just as we want to make sure that when the private sector and companies have our personal information, that they institute the proper safeguards. And there are examples of failure. Mr. Burgess mentioned Target, a private sector example of failure. We certainly hope that we have the infrastructure and security in place to ensure that there is not a failure of security with regard to the Affordable Care Act. But when we're talking about identity theft and how to address it, we need to look at where the real problem is. What's the leading cause of identity theft? Is it the IRS? Is it the Affordable Care Act? Is it the military? No. One of the biggest causes of breaches of personal information is our broken immigration system. The fact that many immigrants in our country are here with fake paperwork, fraudulent Social Security numbers they've purchased or stolen. And H.R. 15, the bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform package, which in a very similar form has already passed the Senate, would address this. So if we actually want to reduce identity theft and breaches of security and safeguard, Mr. Speaker, personal information for the American people, we should address the real problem rather than one of many hypothetical problems. That, again, is no doubt worthy of discussion, but let's address where identity theft actually occurs. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, which has done a lot of work on identity theft from those who are here illegally, experts suggest that 75% of people who are here illegally and working use fraudulent Social Security cards to obtain employment. Again, Americans are the victims of this theft. Children are prime targets. Their report indicates that in Arizona, it's estimated that there are thousands of children that are victims of identity theft. H.R. 15 contains mandatory E-Verify, which the Center for Immigration Studies says would curb and stop virtually 100% of child identity theft. So, I mean, if we're serious, Mr. Speaker, about doing something about the fact that driver's licenses, Social Security numbers are being stolen, well, let's pass immigration reform. Let's make sure that people who are working in our country and have a role here have some kind of provisional work permit, some prospect of a pathway to citizenship over many years or decades, and that we have a mandatory E-Verify mechanism of checking, a way of verifying at the employer level that their paperwork is authentic and it's not, in fact, stolen from an innocent American as it is today. So that would address identity theft. That would address fraud. And we have people today that actually, under our current laws, are incentivized to steal information, personal information from American people. Our immigration system is clearly broken. We need to fix it. H.R. 15, the House's bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill, would create a mandatory employment eligibility verification program. Currently, only 7% of employers in our entire country are enrolled in E-Verify to do workplace authentication of those who work here. So let's bring this bill to the floor. If that's the issue, we want to address, rather than discuss something that's hypothetically of concern. Yes, of course we care about secure information in the Affordable Care, healthcare.gov site. We care about it in military records. We care about it in the IRS. But meanwhile, there are hundreds of thousands of identities being stolen every day, and that's going to continue because this body refuses to bring H.R. 15 to the floor of the House, which would make that number almost zero. Mr. Speaker, the final bill that this rule brings to the floor is H.R. 2279, the Reduce of Excessive Deadlines Obligation Act. It's really a package of 3 bills that would weaken hazardous waste laws like Superfund and the Resources Conservation and Recovery Act. It would actually limit the EPA's oversight to ensure that the American people are safe and healthy. Do we need to remind this body that the reason Congress enacted these safeguards in Superfund is because of tragedies like Love Canal, where a residential neighborhood was built on top of 21,000 tons of hazardous waste, and due to the exposure, the residents suffered very high rates of miscarriages, cancers, and birth defects. The situation was so dire that the federal government wound up having to evacuate the entire community. That's not the America I want to live in, Mr. Speaker. I oppose H.R. 2279 because it could lead to more situations like Love Canal rather than making sure that the American people are safe and healthy in their homes. Mr. Speaker, this debate is not really about reporting requirements. It's about making healthcare.gov function less effectively. It's not really about breaches of our personal information. We could solve that, a big chunk of it, by bringing H.R. 15 to the floor of the House. It's not really about improving our competitiveness by removing unnecessary EPA regulations. It's about risking the health of our families. We need to focus on rebuilding our infrastructure, fixing our broken immigration system, and making sure that we can protect the health of the American people, not jeopardize it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Doug Collins.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a new year. We come down and begin this week, and as I have made a commitment, as I think many of us do, as resolutions on what are we going to do for the new year, and you always try to learn something new. And today has been a busy day with meetings and other things. I've learned a lot, but I've actually come to the floor today to learn something from that was amazing to me, and it was not only that a bill that we're talking about under this rule would actually be designed to make, that was accused of making the Obamacare website worse. I didn't know that was possible. And undoubtedly it can be, but I think it actually helps when we look at what we're doing for the country and what we're doing as we move forward, protecting the interest of the people. So it is with that I rise in strong support of the rule and the underlying pieces of legislation, and in particular H.R. 311, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act of 2014. Even before Obamacare was signed into law, pundits and politicians alike have speculated on the impact it would have on American families. Skyrocketing premiums, loss of coverage, poor quality of care were all correctly predicted by many on this side of the aisle. We come here today, however, because the Americans aren't just faced with the unaffordable health care and broken presidential promises. The security and privacy of our personal information is at great risk due to Obamacare. And one of the things that I think is mentioned here, and should be noted, that protecting the information that is being forced to be given, it should be of our utmost importance, and it's not something that should be just said is we should be doing other bills. Believe me, I would want to talk about other things too, but this is something important that is protecting Americans' interest, and we need to continue to do so. I believe that the best health care system is one that is patient-centered and as far removed from the flawed policies enshrined in Obamacare as possible. Over the upcoming months, I look forward to debating the merits of the Obamacare versus true health care reform with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But today is not that day. Today we come to the floor to simply say American families should know about the breaches of personal identifiable information in the Obamacare exchanges. Regardless of the letter of your political affiliation, wouldn't you like to be notified if the security of your personal information has been compromised? If we get outside the politics of Washington, we ask our constituents, I firmly believe that answer would be yes. It would be actually a resounding yes. So as I come to speak in support of this rule, and speaking also with the underlying bills, and especially when I believe something such as protecting the security of our personal information is so important, I believe it is also important for us to remember as we start a new year that when we come here, people listen. People are concerned about their lives. They're concerned about what has gone on, and over the past few months, especially when it comes to health care. And you can go to teachers in Georgia right now who have had their health care changed because of the ACA. That has just been an interesting mark everywhere I go, and listening to people, and what is now a health care system that they used to have their own insurance is now lost into something that they're struggling with, or whether it's the identifiable nature of stuff, of the issues of their information on the website that possibly could be compromised, to just simply saying that we need regulations for our businesses and making sure our environmental projects are the ones that are prioritized and not just simply at the whim of a certain administration priority. What we've got to do here is to continue to look forward to doing the people's business, and in doing so in such a way that matters to everyday Americans. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, the gentleman said that there's a risk of information being taken from the healthcare.gov site. There's a potential